My name is Alyssa Grant, and I'm 38 years old. I'm the founder and CEO of Vectora Systems, a logistics tech company I built from scratch with little more than a second-hand laptop and a stubborn refusal to quit. After years of battling doubt, from investors, competitors, and especially my own family, I turned that stubbornness into a company now valued in the hundreds of millions. This weekend, I'm returning to my hometown of Briarwood, Oregon, for the first time in nearly 6 years. Not for a reunion, not for the holidays, but to attend my younger brother's wedding, and no one, not even my family, knows that the groom's new father-in-law just signed a $30 million contract with my company. They don't know because my brother never told them. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or worked twice as hard for half the recognition, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story. Trust me, it's one you'll want to remember. As the miles rolled past and the pines thinned into the familiar town limits, my fingers tightened around the steering wheel. I hadn't seen my family in person since the week I landed our first Fortune 500 client. I'd called to share the news, breathless with pride, only to hear my mother say, "That's nice, honey. By the way, Jordan just closed on his third rental property. Isn't he amazing?" Jordan, my younger brother, the golden child, the real estate investor, the legacy builder, as my parents liked to call him. To them, my startup was always a quirky little passion project. Jordan's rental empire? Now that was worthy of Thanksgiving table conversation. Still, I came back. Not for their approval, but maybe, just maybe, for a different ending. I pulled into the gravel driveway of my childhood home, the 2-story colonial that had once felt like the center of the universe. The porch light was still the same flickering yellow bulb, casting long shadows over the garden beds my mother never really kept up with. The welcome mat was faded, but it still greeted me like a memory I hadn't asked for. I stepped out of my car, my fully electric sedan, which I suspected they'd mock behind closed doors, and took in the smell of cedar, distant smoke, and something else. Expectation. Not theirs. Mine. Inside, nothing had changed. The same family portraits hung along the stairwell, all disproportionately focused on Jordan's sports trophies, Jordan's graduation, Jordan's engagement photos. You'd never guess I'd spoken at TED or been listed in Inc. magazine's Top Women in Tech. But the photo of Jordan shaking hands with the mayor at a fundraiser? Front and center above the mantel. "Alyssa, you made it," my mother called from the kitchen, not bothering to come greet me. Her voice floated through the air like a habit more than a welcome. "We weren't sure if you'd remember." I paused in the hallway, suitcase in hand. I remembered. I always remembered. Every milestone, every visit, every phone call unreturned. I remembered all of it. "Hi, Mom," I replied, stepping into the kitchen where she stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot with practiced indifference. She turned, offered a quick glance at my tailored coat and travel-wrinkled blouse, and gave a brief nod. "You look tired," she said. "Long flight?" I'd driven, but I didn't correct her. "Where's Dad?" I asked instead. "Garage," she replied, already turning back to her stew. "He's finishing up a shelving project Jordan asked for. That boy never stops planning. You know he built his fiancée a walk-in wine cellar with his bare hands?" I nodded slowly, the familiar ache rising in my chest. My father had never once visited my office, not even when we moved into our first headquarters in downtown Portland. But he'd driven 2 hours to help Jordan assemble floating shelves from Pinterest. I didn't come here for praise, but I didn't come here to be erased either. The next day, I'd be attending the wedding of my brother to Lindsay Hartwell, the daughter of Charles Hartwell, founder of Hartwell Properties, a nationwide development group known for swallowing up small towns like Briarwood and replacing them with designer outlets and boutique gyms. 3 months ago, unbeknownst to the Hartwells or my own family, their company signed on to implement Vectora's supply chain optimization platform across all 52 of their distribution hubs. It was the largest deal in my company's history, and no one here had any idea. I should have been excited, triumphant even. But standing there in my mother's kitchen, watching her add seasoning to a pot of soup she'd never offer me a taste of, I felt invisible. Again. But this time, something had shifted. This time, I wasn't going to stay invisible. Not quietly, not politely, not anymore. Tomorrow at the wedding, I wouldn't brag, I wouldn't grandstand. But I also wouldn't stay seated at the edge of the room pretending my life was any less valuable than Jordan's. Tomorrow, I would show them, all of them, not for revenge, but because I finally understood that my worth didn't need their recognition to be real. And that's where it begins. The thing about coming home is that it never really feels like coming home. Not when you've spent most of your life being reminded that you were always just a guest in someone else's spotlight. That night, after an awkward dinner of takeout that my mother ordered late, because apparently Jordan had changed the seating chart last minute and she was just so busy, I found myself sitting alone in my childhood bedroom. It still had the same cream walls, the same bookshelves I'd begged for in high school, and the same creaky window I used to sneak open to listen to summer thunderstorms. But something about it felt smaller now, like I'd outgrown it a long time ago, and only now realized it. I glanced at the desk where I'd once spent countless nights hunched over code, teaching myself Python from outdated library books because we didn't have the internet until I was 15. And when we finally did, Jordan got priority for the dial-up because his fantasy football drafts were more important. Even back then, it had been clear. His hobbies were potential. Mine were distractions. The memories came fast, uninvited, and sharp. I was 13 when I won the regional science fair with a solar-powered irrigation system I'd built using parts from old lawn sprinklers and a hacked calculator. I still remember holding that blue ribbon in my hand, so proud I could burst, waiting for someone, anyone, to say they were proud of me. My dad had taken the ribbon from me, nodded, then said, "That's nice, sweetheart, but did you see Jordan's touchdown today?" That was the story of our lives. Jordan was the athlete, the entrepreneur, the face of the Grant family. I was the smart one, the indoor kid, the weird one who never wore enough makeup and asked too many questions at dinner. And when I started applying to colleges, I aimed high, because I had to, because I knew no one was going to hand me a legacy. I got into Caltech with a partial scholarship and an offer to join their robotics research program. I remember the moment I opened the acceptance email, sitting in this very room, my hands shaking as tears streamed down my cheeks. I ran downstairs to tell my parents, heart pounding, thinking this was the moment they'd finally see me. But when I shared the news, my mom barely looked up from her magazine. "Caltech? That's in California, right? That's so far. What about U of O? You could stay nearby, help Jordan with his new real estate business. He could use someone with your kind of brain." My kind of brain. As if my mind wasn't meant to serve me, only to support Jordan's world. I left home at 18 and didn't look back, not because I didn't love them, but because I had to learn how to love myself in the absence of their validation. That meant working 3 jobs in college, crashing on friends' couches between internships, and building Vectora from scratch while eating canned soup and sleeping under my desk. No one in Briarwood ever asked about that part of my story. Not my parents, not the neighbors, not even Jordan. He was too busy showing off his latest property flip or talking about his mentorship under Charles Hartwell, like he was being groomed for real estate royalty. And maybe he was. But what they didn't know, what none of them ever asked, was that I was the one designing the logistics systems Hartwell's company had just spent months trying to solve. They couldn't figure it out internally. Their software team kept missing deadlines, so their operations lead went scouting. She found Vectora through a tech summit in Seattle, where I'd given a keynote on intelligent automation in construction supply chains. She approached me afterward, enthusiastic, unaware of any family connection. And I didn't mention it. Because deep down, I knew what would happen if I did. I'd be reduced to Jordan's sister again. My work would be reframed as an extension of the Grant name instead of what it really was, My own blood, sweat, and refusal to stay small. When the deal closed, I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt guarded, like I had to protect this win from the people most likely to twist it into something it wasn't. I stood up from the bed, walked to the window, and pushed it open. The air outside was sharp with pine and the faintest scent of wood smoke. Across the street, the Johnsons' house still had the same chipped shutters. Their porch light flickered the way it always had, like even the electricity in this town never quite committed to showing up fully. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave that night, to book a hotel in Portland and skip the wedding entirely. But another part, the part that had stayed quiet for years, the part that had sat in silence through every dinner where I was invisible, was done hiding. Tomorrow wouldn't be about revenge. I wasn't going to ruin anything. But I was going to take up space, because I had earned that right, and because no one was going to push me back into the shadows again. Not Jordan, not my parents, not even myself. I didn't sleep much that night. Maybe it was the lumpy mattress I hadn't laid on in years, or maybe it was the ghosts of old memories whispering in the corners of the room, but I found myself staring at the ceiling until the first light crept in through the blinds. By morning, I was up early, pacing the kitchen before my parents even came downstairs. I made myself coffee, black the way I'd learned to drink it when I couldn't afford cream, and leaned against the counter, thinking back to the days when I was building Vectora with nothing but stubborn faith and a stack of rejection emails. After Caltech, I didn't get scooped up by Google or Amazon like some of my classmates. I wasn't the polished, socially connected type. I didn't come from money. I didn't have a safety net or mentors at elite firms. I had grit and a crazy idea about how to use data to solve the mess that is real estate logistics. So I stayed in Los Angeles, rented a windowless studio above a dry cleaner, and worked at a failing IT help desk by day while coding prototypes at night. Most nights, I lived on eggs and instant noodles. I showered at the gym. And when the startup I worked for laid me off without severance, I took my last paycheck and poured it into incorporating Vectora. I remember calling home around that time, not to ask for money, just to share what I was trying to build. I was so excited, so full of hope. I told my mom I was applying for a microloan and pitching at a startup incubator. Her response? "Well, if it doesn't work out, I'm sure Jordan could use help organizing his rental spreadsheets." I laughed on the phone, but when I hung up, I cried so hard I thought my ribs might crack. Not because I wanted their help, I just wanted them to believe in me, even for a moment. But belief wasn't something my family handed out easily, unless your name was Jordan. While I was pulling all-nighters, trying to write clean code between waves of self-doubt, he was being handed properties from my dad's college friend, flipping them with zero experience and full financial backing. He got newspaper write-ups just for hosting open houses. I got silence. My father once told me, "Real estate is real work, Alyssa. Software's just numbers on a screen. One power outage and poof, it's gone." Funny, isn't it? That the numbers on a screen he dismissed would one day save Hartwell Properties millions, but back then, it just stung. Eventually, after nearly 2 years of hustling, Vectora started gaining traction. We built an early version of our platform using open-source tools and offered it to a few mid-sized developers for free just to prove our concept. One of those trials resulted in our first paid contract, a modest $25,000 deal that felt, to me, like $1 billion. It was enough to move out of the windowless room, enough to hire my first employee, enough to believe I wasn't crazy for thinking I could build something real. But I didn't tell my family. Not because I was hiding it, but because I already knew the reaction. They'd either dismiss it, or worse, twist it into something it wasn't. So I stayed quiet and worked harder. I networked like my life depended on it, attended every pitch event in a 100-mile radius, applied to every grant I was even marginally eligible for. I swallowed my pride, gave talks at local meetups with 5 attendees, and answered the same condescending questions from investors who couldn't believe a woman, especially one without an MBA, was running a logistics firm. And then, 2.5 years in, we landed our first institutional investor. A $1.5 million seed round that changed everything. It meant real salaries, office space, engineers who could actually sleep at night. I even bought a decent coffee machine for the break room because I'd promised myself I would when we made it to that point. I finally told my parents then. I was proud. I wanted to share the win. But on the day I called, Jordan had just gotten engaged. And all I heard was, "We're so busy planning the engagement party, sweetie. Can you email us the details? We'll catch up after." They never did. The message was clear. His milestones were announcements. Mine were footnotes. And yet, I kept going. Because while Jordan was attending property tours and posing for engagement photos on Instagram, I was quietly building something they would one day have no choice but to acknowledge. I didn't need applause. I needed impact. And that's what Vectora gave me. By the time we reached our Series B, I had a team of 35, offices in Portland and San Francisco, and inbound calls from companies I used to daydream about pitching to. I was traveling to speak on panels, being interviewed by trade publications, and finally, getting into rooms where I didn't have to prove my right to be there. But still, not a word from my family. Until now. Until this wedding. Until the universe decided that my company's biggest contract to date would land squarely in the backyard of the people who had spent their lives pretending I was nothing more than Jordan's oddball sister. The irony was poetic, but this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. This time, they would know exactly who I was, and not because I begged for it, because I stood in it. The strangest thing about success is how quiet it feels when there's no one around to hear it. A month before the wedding, Vectora signed a $30 million contract with Hartwell Properties, the biggest deal we'd ever landed. The kind of deal that changes everything, not just revenue, but positioning, scale, reputation. The negotiation process had taken nearly 4 months. It started innocently enough. An email from a woman named Camille Dorsey, their operations director, after she attended my keynote in Seattle. She'd approached me afterward, bright-eyed and impressed, asking if we'd be open to scheduling a product demo. She had no idea who I was outside the stage, no idea that her CEO's future son-in-law was my brother, no idea that our families would be eating salmon canapés together in matching pastel formal wear in a matter of weeks. And I didn't correct her. Honestly, I was relieved. It was the first time in years I'd been seen for what I built, without the weight of someone else's last name trailing behind me. We ran 3 pilot tests with Hartwell's West Coast distribution hubs. The results were immediate. Faster throughput, fewer bottlenecks, cleaner reporting. Camille was thrilled. Her team called it a revelation. By the time we got to the contract stage, Hartwell's executive board was fully aligned, and Charles Hartwell himself signed off. 3 days later, the first transfer hit our account, $10 million up front. I stared at the wire confirmation on my screen for almost a full minute before exhaling. Then I did something I hadn't done in a while. I called my mom, not for praise, not even for acknowledgement, just to share the moment, to offer a sliver of connection. $30 million, I said softly, smiling to myself as I paced my office. It's official. Hartwell Properties is one of our clients now. They're using our software in all 52 of their facilities. There was a pause on the other end of the line, like she was waiting for the important part. "Oh, that's nice, honey," she said finally. "Did you get the wedding invite? It should have arrived by now. I can't believe how quickly everything is moving. Lindsay's mother is coordinating with a full team of planners. Charles has this stunning golf course at his estate. Did I tell you that?" I hadn't even had time to answer her first question. I just stood there, staring out the office window at the city skyline, listening to her voice float past me like white noise. She kept talking about Jordan's tux fitting, about the florist, about how excited everyone was for the rehearsal dinner. I let her, and when she finally paused to take a breath, I just said, "That sounds lovely, Mom. I'm happy for them." Because what else was there to say? I hung up the phone with a strange mix of numbness and clarity. If they couldn't see me now, they never would. But I didn't need them to. What I needed was to keep building, to keep leading. That night, after everyone else had left the office, I stayed behind. I walked through each department, engineering, product, customer success, pausing by desks littered with scribbled notes and half-empty coffee cups. My team, my people, the ones who believed before it was trendy to believe. This win was for them, and for the younger version of me, sitting alone in a dorm room with a $200 netbook and a vision too big for the space she'd been told to occupy. I wrote a thank you email to Camille and scheduled our Phase 1 kickoff for the following week. Then I opened the wedding invitation. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, elegant and traditional, with an RSVP card tucked neatly inside. Mr. and Mrs. Grant request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son, Jordan Grant, to Lindsay Marie Hartwell. No mention of my name, not sister of the groom, not guest speaker at Hartwell's Tech Summit. Just a formality. I looked at the reply card for a long moment, then filled it out carefully. Yes, I would attend, +1, and I already knew who I'd ask. His name was Daniel Rhee, a venture capitalist I'd met at a leadership summit 3 months earlier. We'd been quietly seeing each other ever since, trading stories over ramen and long evening walks, skipping the usual games and posturing. He'd seen me at my best and at my most unraveled, and neither version had scared him off. So when I brought it up over dinner the following week, he didn't flinch. "You sure you want me there?" he asked, chopsticks paused midair. "Family weddings can get intense." "They can," I admitted. "But I don't want to go in alone, not this time. I've spent too many years standing by myself in that house. I just need someone there who knows who I really am." He nodded, then smiled. "Then I'll wear my best suit." That moment stayed with me, because for the first time I realized I didn't just have a business I'd built on my own terms. I was finally building a life that reflected that same strength. The wedding was 2 weeks away, and I had no illusions about how it would go. But I knew one thing for sure. This time, I wasn't going to shrink to fit anyone's expectations. I wasn't just Jordan's sister anymore. I was Alyssa Grant, CEO of Vectora Systems, and whether they were ready or not, they were about to remember exactly who I was. 2 weeks later, we pulled up the winding drive toward the Hartwell estate, a sprawling, meticulously manicured property nestled just outside Lake Oswego, Oregon. I'd seen renderings of their distribution centers and schematics of their internal workflows, but nothing prepared me for this. It was opulence disguised as taste, the kind of wealth that didn't flaunt, it assumed. Daniel leaned forward slightly in the passenger seat of my car, his eyes narrowing as the main house came into view. "You didn't mention the estate looked like it came out of a Nancy Meyers film," he said, half joking. "That's because I've never been here," I replied, adjusting my grip on the steering wheel. "Only my code has." The valet line was already backed up by the time we arrived. Black-tie guests stepped out of Range Rovers and Bentleys like it was nothing. Everyone was dressed like a magazine spread, floating in pastel silks and summer linens, laughing over mimosas under the shade of striped umbrellas. A sharply dressed valet opened my door and greeted me with a practiced smile. "Welcome to the Grant Hartwell wedding, ma'am." Daniel stepped out beside me, adjusting his tie with that easy calm of someone who knew how to make an impression without trying. I'd never been so thankful for that quality. Inside, the air buzzed with elegance. Crystal glassware sparkled under the filtered sun. Classical music drifted from a live quartet on the veranda. The scent of hydrangeas and perfectly cut grass mingled in a way that was almost too polished to feel real. But then I saw my mother. She was standing near the floral archway, dressed in a pale mauve gown that must have cost more than my first server rack. Her eyes landed on me, and for a split second she hesitated. Then she smiled. "You're here," she said, walking over. "And this must be Daniel." "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Grant," Daniel said, offering his hand. She shook it, smiling too brightly. You have excellent taste in suits." I waited for her to say something about me, my dress, my hair, my presence. Nothing. "We should say hello to your father," she said, already leading the way toward a cluster of men near the open bar. My dad was mid-laugh when we approached, his hand resting on the shoulder of none other than Charles Hartwell. My stomach tightened. Charles looked exactly like his reputation, silver-haired, confident, crisp. He was flanked by 2 other executives from Hartwell Properties, men I recognized from our contract calls, though they hadn't known I was the CEO. When my father saw me, his smile faltered for a half-second, then returned. "Alyssa," he said with a nod. "Glad you made it." He didn't hug me, just nodded, like we were business acquaintances at a fundraiser. "And this is," he added, gesturing toward Daniel. "Daniel Rhee," Daniel said smoothly. "I'm with Horizon Ventures." That got their attention. Charles turned fully toward us, extending his hand. "Horizon? Now there's a name I know. We nearly partnered with your firm on the Baja property a few years back." Daniel chuckled. "Small world." "And you must be—" Charles turned to me with a warm, curious expression. "Alyssa, was it? Jordan's sister?" I met his gaze evenly. "That's right. We've worked together." Charles blinked, confused. "We have?" Before I could answer, one of the executives, Dale Monroe from the Hartwell supply chain team, let out a quiet, "Oh," as realization dawned. "You're the CEO of Vectora Systems." Charles's expression shifted, slowly, like puzzle pieces snapping into place. "You're the one who designed our integration," he said, eyes narrowing. "The automation rollout. Camille wouldn't stop raving about the woman behind it." I smiled faintly. "That would be me." Charles exhaled sharply, clearly taken aback. "Well, I'll be damned." A beat passed. My father cleared his throat. "I told Jordan to connect the dots," he said quickly. "You know, keep things tidy." But that was a lie. I could hear it in his voice. I said nothing, just nodded. "I had no idea," Charles said again, this time with what almost sounded like admiration. "You really undersold yourself." I didn't correct him, because I hadn't undersold anything. I'd just never been given the stage. Before the conversation could continue, a hush swept across the garden as the string quartet transitioned to a new song. Someone announced that the bride would be arriving shortly. My mother appeared at my side again. "Come along," she said. "Family photos before the ceremony." And then, for the first time, her eyes scanned my dress, a slate blue, off-the-shoulder gown that took 3 fittings and a long stare in the mirror to feel worthy of. "Practical," she commented. I didn't answer. Because the thing I felt most in that moment wasn't hurt. It was clarity. No matter what I wore, no matter what I built, they would always find a way to make it feel small. Unless I stopped letting them. The moment I stepped away from the photo area, I felt like I could breathe again. Standing among the pastel-clad family unit, posing for 100 digital versions of an image that would never include the full truth, it drained something from me. The cameras had captured my smile, my shoulders held high, my practiced poise. But none of them captured what it cost to stand in that frame. Daniel had been waiting quietly near a small koi pond by the side garden. When he saw me walking toward him, he offered me a glass of water and that gentle, grounding look of his. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. I nodded, but it wasn't convincing. "They lined us up like ornaments," I murmured. "Perfect pieces in a display they don't even realize I outgrew years ago." "You held your own," he said. "You always do." I gave him a tired smile, sipped the water, and looked back toward the estate. Guests were beginning to find their seats for the ceremony. The Hartwell's wedding planner, an impeccably dressed woman with a headset and clipboard, moved through the crowd like a choreographer conducting a ballet. Somewhere beyond the tall hedges, I heard the soft hum of a golf cart pulling up. That had to be Lindsay, the bride. The ceremony was minutes away, and that's when I remembered my last call with Jordan. It had been about a week before I arrived in Briarwood. I'd called him, trying, despite everything, to reach out, to be the older sister who put old things aside for the sake of something bigger. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Alyssa. Sorry, things are insane over here. Lindsay's losing her mind about the centerpiece colors." "I just wanted to say congrats," I told him, "and that I'm looking forward to being there." He hesitated. Yeah, should be a good time. Lots of people. Dad's thrilled. Mom's, well, you know Mom." I paused, testing the space between us. "Anything I can help with? Vendor stuff, last-minute tech issues?" He laughed nervously. "No, it's all covered. Actually, listen, there were a few last-minute changes with the seating, just minor tweaks. You're still on the list, obviously. It's just a lot of movement." "Okay," I said. "Anything I should know?" "Nope. All good. Just show up and have fun, yeah?" The call had ended with forced pleasantries, but now, standing here, watching as the ceremony began to assemble, I realized something deeper. That call hadn't been about informing me. It had been about preempting something. He knew. He knew what they'd done with the seating, and he didn't stop it. The music shifted to a slower tempo. A hush settled over the garden. Guests turned their heads toward the top of the stone steps, where Lindsay, in a gleaming ivory gown, appeared on the arm of Charles Hartwell. She looked perfect, poised, every hair in place. But there was something hollow in her expression, something too polished to feel entirely joyful. And then I saw Jordan. He stood at the altar beneath a cascade of white roses, his hands folded tightly in front of him, his smile mechanical. His eyes scanned the crowd, but not for Lindsay. For someone else. For me? For his own guilt? I didn't know. But I felt it. That tension. That shift. Like the glossy exterior of this entire event had a hairline crack running through it, and no one wanted to be the first to press. The ceremony began. Words floated around me, vows, readings, laughter in the right places. Lindsay's voice trembled ever so slightly when she said forever. Jordan's voice stayed flat the whole time, and yet the audience smiled, applauded, wiped tears like it was all unfolding in a dream. By the time the officiant declared them husband and wife, I was no longer listening. My thoughts had gone somewhere else entirely. To the email I'd received that morning from Camille, confirming Hartwell's Phase 2 rollout. To the final payment schedule. To the line item that included VIP access badges for Hartwell's internal team, including Jordan, who would soon be using the very platform he never acknowledged me for building. I watched them walk back down the aisle, hand in hand, surrounded by applause and bubbles and distant clapping, and in that moment I made a quiet decision. If they were going to keep pretending I was background noise in their golden narrative, then I was going to speak in a language they couldn't ignore. Not with anger, not with pettiness, but with precision. Respect isn't given when you've earned it. It's given when you stop tolerating the lack of it. Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand as the crowd stood to follow the newlyweds toward the reception tent. "You ready for whatever's next?" he asked. I looked toward the shimmering structure ahead, where my name had been typed into a spreadsheet by someone who didn't know, didn't care, what I had built. "Almost," I said, "but not quite." Because something was coming. And I knew, deep in my chest, that the next few hours were going to change everything. The reception tent was enormous, larger than most event halls I'd spoken in. White chiffon walls billowed gently from the breeze outside, and crystal chandeliers glowed from the ceiling like they were borrowed from Versailles. A small jazz ensemble played near the back, just beside a fully stocked oyster bar. Guests streamed in with drinks already in hand, their laughter echoing beneath the arched ceiling. The air smelled faintly of truffle, champagne, and peony arrangements that towered over the centerpieces like living sculptures. Daniel and I stepped inside together, the click of my heels muffled by the thick carpet beneath the tables. It was stunning, impeccable, and cold, because beneath all the soft light and careful curation, I could feel something lurking, like a thread about to snap. We approached the entrance table, where a young woman in a sleek black jumpsuit stood holding an iPad. Her headset buzzed faintly as she greeted each arriving guest with a smile. "Name?" she asked brightly, glancing up. "Alyssa Grant, +1, I replied. Her fingers danced across the screen. Pause, scroll, tap, and then her brow creased. "I'm sorry," she said, biting her lip. "Just a moment." She turned away without explanation and disappeared behind a draped divider near the back. Daniel looked at me, brows raised. I offered a small shrug, though I felt the pulse quicken at my neck. A moment later, she returned, with a different woman beside her. Older, blonder, wearing a tailored suit and a strained expression that told me she was management. "Miss Grant," the second woman said quietly, "we've had a small issue with the seating arrangements. We are so terribly sorry. There were a few last-minute table adjustments due to some additional VIPs. Unfortunately, the main reception tables are full." I blinked. "I RSVP'd over a month ago." "Yes," she nodded, her voice rehearsed. "And we truly appreciate your attendance. We've made alternative arrangements for you and your guest." "Alternative," Daniel repeated slowly. The woman gestured for us to follow. I could feel heads turning as we were led past the glistening tables and dancing lights, through a side flap in the tent, and down a short hallway that led to the side of the catering station. The clatter of pans, the hiss of steam, the scent of garlic and oil filled the narrow corridor. Staff in black and white uniforms moved efficiently in and out of double-swinging doors, and tucked in the back corner of the prep kitchen, behind a tray of unbaked tartlets and 2 massive stock pots, was a small round table with 2 chairs hastily covered in linen. A single votive candle flickered between them like a cruel joke. I stared. For a second, I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. "I don't understand," I said finally. "You sat me? Us? In the kitchen?" The catering manager looked vaguely ashamed. "The bride made some adjustments this morning to prioritize business guests. We had to make space. I assure you the food and service will be exactly the same." I was silent, my hands curled slowly into fists at my sides. Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but sharp. "She's the groom's sister, and the CEO of the company that just signed a multimillion-dollar deal with Hartwell Properties. Is this really how you treat family or partners?" Before she could answer, I heard footsteps. Deliberate, designer heels on tile. Lindsay Hartwell appeared in the doorway, holding a champagne flute and wearing a smile too sweet to be sincere. "Oh, there you are," she said brightly. "Is everything all right?" "No," I replied, keeping my voice level. "We were just informed that we've been seated in the kitchen." She gave a mock-surprised tilt of her head. "Oh, that. Yes, we had a few last-minute additions and had to shuffle things. Daddy's team is here tonight, and we simply couldn't split them up. I'm sure you understand." "I don't," I said evenly. "Especially since this event includes executives from my company's largest client." Her eyes sparkled, just enough to tell me this wasn't ignorance. It was intentional. "Well," she said, sipping her drink, "sometimes sacrifices have to be made." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but I gently touched his arm. "Not yet." To the catering manager, I said calmly, "Would you give us a moment?" She nodded and slipped away quickly. I turned back to Lindsay. "You do realize who I am, don't you?" She blinked slowly. "Of course. You're Jordan's sister." "No," I said, my voice now firmer. "I'm Alyssa Grant, founder and CEO of Vectora Systems, the software your father's company just implemented across their national logistics network. The same one that's projected to save them $12 million in operational costs this year alone. Lindsay's expression didn't falter. Well, that's lovely, but tonight isn't about business. It's about family. No, I said again. Tonight is about power. And you've made it very clear who you think holds it. She tilted her head, that smile never quite slipping. You're welcome to stay, or not, but the seating chart won't change. Not tonight. Daniel stepped beside me again, voice cold now. We'll decide that. But I already knew there was no seat for me at this table, because they never planned to make one. And I had finally reached the moment where pretending otherwise wasn't just painful, it was beneath me. I didn't cry in front of Lindsay. I didn't shout or throw my champagne flute across the kitchen or demand a scene the way every part of my pride screamed for me to do. Instead, I turned to Daniel and whispered, "Can you give me a few minutes?" He didn't argue, just nodded and slipped outside with a steady hand on my back, like he already knew I needed solitude more than solutions. Once the doors closed behind him, I stood there alone, the low hum of industrial refrigerators and the clatter of utensils fading into a kind of numb silence. The staff pretended not to notice me. Their glances were quick, cautious, professional. But I could feel it, that awkward awareness of being somewhere you weren't supposed to be. I moved past them and into the hallway, found a narrow bathroom near the prep area, and locked myself in the last stall. And there, in a room lined with polished tiles and dim lighting, I let the tears come. Not loud, not messy, just quiet, a slow unraveling of breath and memory. Because it wasn't just the table, it wasn't just tonight, it was all of it. Every birthday overlooked, every school award met with a distracted, "That's nice." Every moment of pride that had to be folded into silence because Jordan had just done something louder, shinier, more in line with what our family deemed worthy. I remembered my 16th birthday, when my parents forgot because Jordan had a regional baseball tournament. They gave me a cake 3 days later, still in the plastic grocery store container, the frosting slightly smudged, candles thrown in like an afterthought. "You understand, right?" my mom had said. "Your brother's team made state." I did understand. I always had. I understood when they were late to my Caltech graduation because Jordan's fraternity was hosting an alumni brunch. I understood when I got my first office lease and called home, only to be told they were grilling steaks to celebrate Jordan's promotion to regional property lead, a title our dad had invented to make his resume look better. And now, even after building a company that had just delivered the biggest infrastructure upgrade Hartwell Properties had implemented in a decade, I was eating my dinner in a hallway while they clinked champagne flutes over salmon carpaccio and speeches about legacy. I pressed my back against the cold stall wall, one hand over my mouth to muffle the shaking exhale that escaped. Not because I was ashamed of crying, but because I was so tired of carrying it. Tired of trying to make them proud. Tired of shrinking myself into something digestible. Tired of confusing endurance for peace. After a long while, I wiped my face, took a few steadying breaths, and stepped out of the stall. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red, but my spine was straight. My lipstick had smudged slightly at the corners, so I reapplied it with slow precision. I stared into my own reflection and said out loud, "You don't belong in the kitchen. Not anymore. Not ever again." When I stepped back out, Daniel was waiting just down the hallway. He handed me a clean napkin and a glass of water. No words, just presence. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I said softly. "Don't be," he replied. "If anything, I'm glad I did. Now I understand more than I ever could have from stories alone." I smiled, tired but grateful. It's strange. I came here thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see me. "And now?" he asked. "Now I see myself, and that's more than enough." My phone buzzed in my clutch. It was Camille Dorsey. A simple message. "Let me know if there's anything else we need to prepare for Phase 2. Also, the transfer went through. All $30 million. Congratulations." I stared at the screen, then looked back up at Daniel. A clarity settled over me that I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. They might have seated me next to the catering trays tonight, but I had already built the table. I had designed the system, closed the deal, created the value. The applause I'd been chasing all my life, I no longer needed it. I had something better, control, and I knew exactly what I had to do next. The music was louder when we stepped back into the tent. Somewhere between the champagne toasts and the plated entrees, the reception had found its rhythm. Laughter floated through the air, silverware clinked against china, and waitstaff moved with choreographed grace between tables draped in white linen and soft candlelight. But the moment I crossed the threshold again, I knew I wasn't the same woman who had walked out. This time, I wasn't looking for a seat. I was looking for perspective. Daniel walked beside me without needing direction. He knew I wasn't going back to that kitchen table. Not physically, not metaphorically, not ever again. We stopped just inside the main tent, standing at the edge of the room like observers at a theater. The head table stretched across the far end, elevated slightly, as if on a pedestal. Jordan sat at its center, one hand on Lindsay's back, as they smiled for a photographer. Charles Hartwell and several of his lieutenants flanked them, raising glasses in a toast. My eyes scanned the group, and then I saw it. Projected across a digital display behind the head table was a presentation slide. Hartwell Properties plus Grant Legacy Partnership. Below it, a series of bullet points highlighting efficiency improvements, cost reductions, and future expansion. I squinted, and there it was. Thanks to Jordan Grant's leadership and insight, Hartwell's logistics strategy enters a new era. I blinked slowly, a flicker of heat rising behind my sternum. Jordan's leadership? Jordan had never touched a line of code, never reviewed an interface design, never sat in on a single onboarding call. His insight came in the form of inherited assumption. And yet, here it was again, the story rewriting itself in real time. I turned to Daniel. "They're using the contract," I whispered. "They're leveraging my work, my system, as Jordan's professional clout." Daniel frowned. "They're selling your company's innovation as a family achievement." "No," I said, my voice like ice, "as his achievement." He didn't ask what I was going to do. He just said, "Whatever it is, I'm with you." I made my way across the room, not fast, not dramatic, just deliberate. I paused to greet a few guests along the way, accepting hollow compliments about the ceremony, offering polite nods, ignoring the flashes of recognition when people finally remembered who I was. As I neared the head table, Charles Hartwell caught sight of me. He stood with the ease of a man used to authority, raising a hand in greeting. "Alyssa," he said, loud enough for several surrounding tables to hear. "We were just discussing the rollout. It's been absolutely transformative. Jordan here has been instrumental." I looked at him calmly, then turned to my brother. Jordan smiled, the same performative smile he'd worn since we were kids playing charades at Thanksgiving, trying to mask a truth with charm. "Actually," I said clearly, "I think we should clarify something." The volume around us dimmed just slightly. People tuned in without meaning to. "The logistics system Hartwell Properties is using? The one you're referencing on those slides?" I continued. "It was developed by my team, Vectora Systems, a company I founded, built, and still led as CEO." A hush settled over the table. Jordan's smile twitched. Charles blinked. "Well, of course. Yes. Your name came up. I just assumed—" "You assumed Jordan was the bridge," I finished for him. "I understand. It's a convenient story, but not an accurate one." Lindsay shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," I said. "But I do think it's worth mentioning that this contract was earned, not gifted. And if anyone wants to continue referencing Vectora's contribution to Hartwell's success, it should be based on facts, not family proximity." Daniel stepped forward then, offering me nothing more than the quiet assurance of presence. I glanced back at the crowd, noticing a few Hartwell executives murmuring to each other, several guests watching with renewed interest, and a few cameras lowering mid-snap. Charles cleared his throat. Of course. Thank you for the correction. It's important to credit things properly. I nodded once, and then I turned to Jordan. His face had gone pale beneath the golden lights. I'm not angry, I said quietly, just for him. But I'm done letting you build your image from what I've bled to create. He swallowed, unable to respond. I didn't wait for him to. Daniel and I turned, leaving the table behind, not with theatrics, but with certainty, because I hadn't come here to be seen. I had come here to be clear, and now that I had been, there was only one thing left to do: decide what this contract meant moving forward. We didn't stay long after that. Daniel and I left the reception the same way we arrived, quietly. No scene, no drama, just footsteps on marble and the murmur of music fading behind us. The air outside was cooler now, the Montana sky shifting into twilight. A few guests lingered on the lawn, oblivious or pretending to be, sipping cocktails beneath glowing garden lights. As we walked toward the parking area, I could still feel the adrenaline humming beneath my skin. Not panic, not fear. It was something older, wiser, certainty. When we reached the car, Daniel opened the door for me. Before I got in, I turned back to the house, the same house I used to ride past on my bike as a teenager, wondering if someday I'd be welcomed through its grand doors not as Jordan's sister, but as myself. Tonight had given me the answer, and oddly, it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Once inside the car, I pulled out my phone and opened the encrypted business folder I rarely touched during family trips. There it was, the contract between Vectora Systems and Hartwell Properties, already in full effect. And below it, something most people didn't know. A performance clause, a reputational integrity clause, to be exact. I had inserted it nearly 6 months ago, at Camille's suggestion, after the third time Jordan tried to claim he'd been instrumental in the negotiations. At the time, I thought it was overkill. Now, it felt prophetic. The clause allowed termination of the agreement if any party engaged in reputational misrepresentation that jeopardized the integrity of the provider, me. And while it had never been invoked before, tonight had handed me more than enough reason. Daniel sat beside me in the quiet, the hum of the engine filling the space between us. "You thinking about pulling the plug?" he asked gently. I looked out the window at the fading horizon. "I'm not thinking. I'm deciding." He nodded slowly, no surprise in his expression. "You'd be within your rights." "It's not about revenge," I said. "It's about alignment. They want my innovation, my work, my systems, but not my presence, not my name. And that disconnect, it's not sustainable." Silence again. Then he asked, "Do you want me to handle Camille? Or will you?" I smiled faintly. "I will." Because this wasn't a task to delegate. This was the moment I stopped asking for permission to exist where I had built the foundation. I drafted the message slowly, carefully, choosing each word like it mattered. Because it did. Camille, following tonight's events and the continued misrepresentation of Vectora Systems' contributions to Hartwell Properties, I'm invoking Clause 6C effective immediately. Termination will be finalized within 48 hours. Please prepare all relevant communications for transition. AG. I reread it 3 times before hitting send. Then I closed the app, turned off the screen, and leaned back against the seat. A strange feeling washed over me. Not relief, not yet, but something close to peace. Daniel reached over and gently took my hand. "They won't see this coming," he said softly. "No," I replied. "But they should have." Because here's the thing no one prepares you for when you come from a family like mine. They teach you to give, to show up, to support, but they never teach you how to walk away. Tonight, I had taught myself, and in doing so, I had rewritten the rules, not just for them, But for me, I wasn't the sister in the background anymore. I was the architect of consequence, and I had just pulled the first thread. The moment I opened my inbox Monday morning, I knew the aftermath had begun in full force. Emails poured in like a flood. Over 40 messages waiting for me, most marked urgent, some flagged as high priority. From Hartwell Properties alone, nearly 20 came: apologies, clarifications, pleas for meetings, and carefully worded attempts at damage control. The first one I opened was from Camille Dorsey, the operations director who had been the earliest and strongest advocate for Vectora's technology at Hartwell. Subject: urgent meeting request, immediate attention needed. Alyssa, I am deeply sorry about the events that unfolded at the wedding last Saturday. None of what happened was anticipated or sanctioned by our corporate leadership. I want to assure you personally that we are committed to rectifying this situation and maintaining the strong partnership we have built. Charles Hartwell himself has requested a call at your earliest convenience to discuss next steps. Please let me know when you are available. Warm regards, Camille Dorsey. I sat back in my chair, letting the words settle. The sincerity in Camille's message was clear, but the damage went far deeper than a simple scheduling misstep or awkward seating chart. I replied promptly, scheduling a call for the next morning, determined to keep the conversation professional but firm. As the morning unfolded, my phone buzzed non-stop. Calls from Hartwell's senior management, their legal team, and even Charles himself, each more urgent than the last. They all wanted assurances that I was unharmed, that my company was valued, that this unfortunate event would not derail our business. But no amount of apologies could erase the sting of humiliation, the years of silent dismissal echoing louder than any regret they expressed now. In the conference room, my leadership team awaited. Gregory, our chief operating officer, was already pulling up spreadsheets and projections. "We're staring down at a minimum 20% revenue shortfall this quarter if Hartwell pulls out," he said flatly, eyes scanning the screen. "They're responsible for nearly a quarter of our forecasted income." Sarah, our head of client relations, looked exhausted. "I've been on multiple calls with their team. Camille is genuine, but others are defensive. There's talk about renegotiating terms, but trust has been shattered." The room grew quiet as I absorbed their concerns. Then I stood. We built Vectora on integrity and respect. If we lose the contract, it won't be for lack of trying, but I will not compromise those values. Gregory shifted. "You're prepared to cut ties with Hartwell?" "Absolutely," I said, voice steady. "This isn't personal. It's business. If our partners can't respect us as equals, we can't afford the risk." Sarah spoke up. "Westfield Partners is still interested. They've been hesitant but impressed by our latest rollout. I think with some incentives, we can close that deal faster than expected." "Good," I said. "Accelerate international expansion plans, too. If Hartwell walks, we won't just survive, we'll thrive." That afternoon, Charles Hartwell called. His voice was formal, but weighted with regret. "Alyssa, I want to apologize sincerely for the way you were treated at the wedding. The seating situation was unacceptable and does not reflect our values. We are taking internal steps to ensure this never happens again." I acknowledged the apology but kept my response firm. "I appreciate your words, Charles, but actions speak louder. We'll discuss the contract tomorrow, but only if I'm confident this was an aberration, not a pattern." As I hung up, a quiet calm washed over me. I was no longer at their mercy. Later that week was a blur: meetings, calls, drafting contingency plans. Despite the chaos, I felt a flicker of hope. Hope that Vectora could rewrite its own story, one where respect was non-negotiable. And through it all, the reminder rang clear. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means walking away from what you thought you needed. And sometimes, that's exactly what opens the door to what you truly deserve. The morning after I sent that final message to Hartwell Properties, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in years. Eleanor Grant, my estranged aunt, the one who had vanished from our lives when I was still a kid. swallowed by a family rift so deep that even the holidays felt hollow without her presence. 20 years of silence had woven itself into the fabric of our family story like an invisible scar. My father never spoke her name. My mother seemed to pretend she didn't exist, and I, for so long, had buried the questions behind work, ambition, and a relentless push forward. But here she was, reaching out. Her text was simple, yet powerful. Alyssa, I heard about the wedding. I'm proud of you. You've broken the cycle. Let's talk. I stared at the screen, heart pounding with a mixture of hope, fear, and hesitation. Was this a new beginning or just another false start? For a long moment, I did nothing. Then I hit the call button. Her voice was softer than I remembered, more grounded, like the weight of years had carved out a new kind of strength. "Hello, Alyssa," she said, her tone gentle. "It's been too long." "It has," I replied, voice catching slightly. We talked for what felt like hours. She filled in the gaps, stories I hadn't known, wounds I hadn't realized I carried. Eleanor told me about her struggle to build a business in an industry dominated by men, how she'd spent summers working on construction sites alongside my father, only to have her efforts dismissed as a hobby or just a phase. How the family business, a legacy passed down through generations, was always his domain, her dreams relegated to the background. I told her about my own battles, the silent dismissals, the unspoken comparisons to Jordan, the long nights fueled by caffeine and determination. About Vectora's rise, about the contract with Hartwell Properties, and about the wedding night that became my reckoning. She listened without interruption, her presence steady, a balm I hadn't known I needed. "There's a pattern here," she said finally. "One we didn't create but have the power to break." We spoke about family legacies, how they could both uplift and imprison, how they shaped us, and how sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to rewrite the story ourselves. By the time we hung up, we had plans to meet for dinner, a cautious step toward mending the fractured bonds that had long defined our family. In the days that followed, the fallout from the contract termination continued to ripple outward. Gerald Winters, a senior partner at Apex Investments, reached out with a surprising proposal, not just a new contract, but a potential strategic investment aimed at fueling Vectora's ambitious expansion plans. "I admire your leadership," he said during our call. "Standing firm on your principles takes guts. Sometimes walking away from the wrong deal is the best move. It sends a message and opens doors to opportunities aligned with your values." His words resonated deeply. It was validation from a place I hadn't expected, reinforcing the path I'd chosen despite the personal cost. Amid this professional upheaval, the personal reconnection with Eleanor offered something more profound than just family ties. It was a mirror reflecting a shared history of resilience, a promise that the stories we inherit aren't the ones we have to live by. The weight of years of silence began to lift, replaced by cautious hope. Hope that the fractures within my family could someday be bridges. As I prepared for that dinner with Eleanor, I realized this journey was no longer just about business or familial approval. It was about reclaiming my narrative, about creating a legacy defined not by omission or invisibility, but by strength, integrity, and self-respect. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Healing rarely is. But for the first time, I felt ready, not just to face the challenges, but to embrace the possibilities. Because sometimes, standing up for yourself means more than asserting your worth. It means embracing the parts of your story that have been waiting in the shadows to be told. And I was finally ready to tell mine. The evening air in Portland carried the faint scent of rain and pine as I pulled up to the small, tucked-away restaurant where Eleanor and I had agreed to meet. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would expect from a Grant family reunion, no chandeliers or sprawling estates here, just a cozy corner booth bathed in the soft glow of amber lights. Perfect, I thought, for something honest. I spotted her immediately. Slightly older than I remembered, but with the same steady gaze, the same air of resilience. She smiled as I approached, a warmth that instantly softened years of distance. "Good to see you, Alyssa," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "It's good to see you too, Eleanor," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. The weight of what had been left unsaid hung heavy between us. We ordered our drinks, hers, a chamomile tea, mine, just water, and settled into the kind of tentative conversation that felt like the beginning of rebuilding a fragile bridge. "I've thought about you a lot," Eleanor began, her eyes reflecting a mix of regret and hope. "About how things went wrong, and how silent it all became." I nodded, the memories rushing in, of family dinners fractured by unspoken tensions, of holidays spent in separate rooms, of the empty spaces where her laughter should have been. "It's strange," I said slowly, "how distance can make you forget the person you actually missed, not just the idea of them." She smiled, reaching out to cover my hand briefly. "We're here now, and that's what matters." The conversation deepened as she shared stories from her own path, the months she spent fighting for her interior design firm in the 80s, pushing against a construction industry that refused to recognize a woman's talent. How she had given up a place at the family company not because of lack of ability, but because the narrative had been set decades before. "I know the feeling," I said, my throat tightening. "To have your work overlooked, your worth ignored." "Exactly," Eleanor said. "That's why what you did at the wedding, it wasn't just about you. It was about breaking a pattern, about showing that we don't have to live by their story anymore." Her words echoed something I'd been realizing in myself, the power of rewriting one's own legacy, no matter how deeply ingrained the past. Our dinner stretched on, filled with laughter and tears, apologies and promises, not to erase the past, but to move beyond it. By the time we parted, a fragile hope had taken root. A beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Alongside the personal growth unfolding, Vectora was gaining momentum on the professional front. Our pivot toward Westfield Partners and other new clients was bearing fruit. The investment discussions with Gerald Winters progressed, offering new lifelines and opportunities. But it was Eleanor's presence, the reconnection to a family member who truly understood the fight, that added a new dimension to everything. One afternoon, as I sat in my office overlooking the Willamette River, Eleanor called with a new piece of the family puzzle. A long hidden letter from my grandmother, full of stories and regrets, of hopes stifled by tradition and circumstance. Reading her words felt like unlocking a secret room inside myself, a room I hadn't even known was locked. It was a reminder that our family's story was complex, full of love and loss, strength and silence, and that I had the power to shape its next chapter. The journey wasn't over, far from it. But now, armed with newfound insight and support, I was ready to face the challenges ahead, not just as a CEO, but as a woman reclaiming her place in a family that had once tried to erase her, and that, I realized, was the true victory. The weeks following my reunion with Eleanor were a whirlwind of unexpected emotions and mounting pressures. What I had hoped would be a gradual healing of old wounds quickly turned into a battlefield of conflicting loyalties, business demands, and family expectations. Vectora Systems was growing faster than ever, but with growth came scrutiny. Hartwell Properties, bruised by the contract termination and public fallout, wasn't taking my decision quietly. Behind the polished apologies and carefully worded emails lay a simmering tension, silent threats of litigation, veiled warnings about lost opportunities, and attempts to discredit me in the industry. One afternoon, as I sat in the glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Portland, my phone buzzed relentlessly. The caller ID flashed, "Robert Grant." My father. I hesitated, then answered. "Alyssa." His voice was stern, almost cold. "You're making things worse. Scott is furious. The family is in chaos because of you. This was your choice, but the fallout is ours to bear." I took a breath. "Dad, I'm protecting the company I built. I'm protecting myself. You've always favored Scott, but I'm not willing to be invisible anymore. Favoring Scott? Alyssa, he's carrying the family legacy. You should be supporting him, not tearing him down. The conversation ended with a sharp click, leaving me stunned. The same old rhetoric, the same old roles, except now I was standing firm, unwilling to retreat. At home that evening, I shared the call with Eleanor. Her eyes darkened with understanding. "It's the classic fight for control," she said. "Your father's scared of losing what he thinks belongs to him." "But it's never belonged to him alone," I said quietly. "It was just easier to pretend it did." On the business front, Gerald Winter's interest was growing, but even that wasn't without complication. His firm wanted assurances about Vectora's stability amidst the family turmoil. I found myself negotiating not just with investors, but with the shadow of my lineage. One late night, after a marathon of calls and strategy sessions, Daniel and I sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights. "Do you ever wonder if the family will ever accept you?" he asked softly. I looked out at the horizon, lights twinkling like distant stars. "I don't need their acceptance anymore. I need their respect. And if they can't give it, I'll build my own world where I'm seen." The hardest battles, I realized, were not always fought in boardrooms or contracts, but in the quiet spaces between family dinners and phone calls. The same family that once whispered I wouldn't make it was now watching every move I made. And I was no longer apologizing for my ambition. Instead, I was embracing it. Because my worth wasn't measured by their approval, but by my own conviction. And that truth was the foundation of everything I was building. The days stretched long, a relentless blend of boardroom battles, investor meetings, and late-night strategizing. Vectora Systems was evolving rapidly, but so was the weight on my shoulders. Success wasn't a quiet celebration. It was a constant balancing act between the company I'd poured my soul into and the family ties fraying with every decision I made. One crisp morning in Portland, the city still cloaked in mist, I sat in my corner office overlooking the Willamette River. The skyline was waking slowly, but my mind was already racing through the challenges ahead. Gregory, my COO, stepped in quietly, carrying a fresh cup of coffee. "Alyssa, the Westfield deal is gaining traction. They want to move up the timeline, but they're cautious about the recent headlines." I took a sip, the bitter warmth grounding me. "Headlines," I repeated. I never imagined walking away from Hartwell would make such waves. Gregory shrugged. "It's not just business. It's family drama. Investors are watching." I nodded, feeling the familiar ache of being caught between worlds, the personal and the professional, each pulling me in opposite directions. Later that day, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Eleanor. "Family dinner Friday. Mom and Dad want to talk. It's a start." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. After everything, the silences, the dismissals, the invisible years, this felt like the first real opening. That Friday evening, the Grant family home felt smaller, more intimate than I remembered. The scent of roasted herbs and baked bread filled the air, a sharp contrast to the cold boardrooms where I spent most of my days. Mom was there first, her eyes tired but hopeful. Dad followed, his posture stiff, the years etched into the lines on his face. Jordan sat quietly beside them, the wedding scars still fresh. "Thank you for coming," Mom said softly, her voice almost trembling. "We've been distant, and maybe we didn't see you the way we should have." I met her gaze steadily. "It wasn't just distance. It was choice. But I'm here now." Dad cleared his throat. "Your success with Vectora, it's undeniable. And maybe we were wrong to overlook it. I want to understand more. About you, your company, and who you've become." Jordan looked down, unable to meet my eyes. The conversation was tentative, filled with pauses and old wounds trying to find words, but it was progress. Afterward, as I stood by the doorway, Daniel squeezed my hand. "You did it," he whispered. I smiled, feeling a flicker of warmth I hadn't known in years. Yet the path ahead was clear. Healing takes time. And rebuilding trust isn't a project with quarterly goals. It's a daily commitment. The next morning, back at Vectora, I found renewed energy. We were preparing for the Westfield presentation, an opportunity to prove that integrity and innovation could coexist, that leadership meant more than just profit margins. As I addressed my team, I shared not just strategies but a vision, a future where we defined our worth, set our boundaries, and refused to be invisible. Their eyes shone with belief. And in that moment, I knew that no matter the storms outside, inside these walls, we were building something unbreakable. Because true success isn't just about the deals you close, it's about the legacy you create. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope stretched thin over a canyon of expectations and doubts. Just when I thought the tentative peace with my family might hold, the undercurrents beneath the surface began to stir again. Old tensions, long buried, bubbled to the top with a sharpness I hadn't anticipated. One morning, as I arrived at Vectora's Portland office, the usual hum of productivity was punctuated by an unexpected visit: my father. Robert Grant walked through the glass doors with a purposeful stride, his expression unreadable. I met him in the lobby. "Alyssa," he said, voice low. "We need to talk." I nodded, motioning toward the conference room. Once inside, the air between us felt charged, the kind of energy that precedes both confrontation and clarity. "I've been thinking," he began, "about everything. About Scott, the wedding, and what happened after. I realize now that I was wrong to dismiss your achievements for so long. The company you built, it's impressive." I let that settle for a moment, then met his gaze. "I appreciate that, Dad, but it's not just about acknowledgement. It's about respect, and that's been missing." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, and I'm sorry. But there are pressures you might not fully see. From the board, from the family. Scott's position in the company is precarious. He's trying to hold on to what he's worked for." I leaned forward. At what cost? If holding on means stepping over me, then maybe it's time the family reconsidered what legacy really means. Before he could respond, my phone buzzed. A message from Scott. "Need to talk. Lunch tomorrow. Just us." I looked up sharply. Dad's eyes narrowed. "You're going?" I hesitated. "I don't know." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes, the hardest conversations lead to the most important changes." That night, I found myself replaying the moments from the past months: the confrontation at the wedding, the contract termination, the fragile reconnection with Eleanor, and now this impending conversation with Scott. Success, I realized, wasn't just measured by profits or contracts. It was measured by courage, the courage to face the fractures, to speak uncomfortable truths, and to choose integrity over convenience. The next day, I met Scott at a quiet cafe downtown. He looked different from the last time I saw him, less guarded, more worn. "I'm sorry," he said without preamble, "for everything, for not standing up for you, for letting things get this far." I studied him, the brother I'd known and the man he was becoming, flawed, trying, human. "We can't change the past," I said softly, "but maybe we can start building something better." Our conversation stretched long into the afternoon, weaving through apologies, explanations, and tentative plans for moving forward, not as rivals, but as siblings. Walking away from that table, I felt a fragile hope, a belief that the family I'd thought lost might still be found, one step at a time. Back at Vectora, challenges awaited. The Westfield Partners presentation loomed, new contracts were on the horizon, and investors watched closely. But now, amidst the storms, I carried a steadiness rooted not just in ambition, but in a renewed sense of self. Because standing tall isn't just about what you build, it's about who you become while building it. The city lights of Portland twinkled softly outside my office window as I sat back in my chair, the quiet hum of the night enveloping me like a gentle embrace. It was hard to believe how far this journey had taken me, through shattered family ties, hard-won victories, and the kind of self-discovery that only comes when you're willing to face your own worth head-on. I thought back to that day at the Hartwell wedding, the sting of being seated in the kitchen, the weight of invisible years pressing down like an unshakable shadow, how I carried that silent ache through every birthday overlooked, every achievement dismissed, and how, in that moment of clarity, I finally decided I was done shrinking, done waiting for their recognition, done hoping for approval that was never going to come. Instead, I chose to stand, not just for myself, but for every woman who's been told she's less than she is, for every entrepreneur who's struggled in silence, sidelined by family expectations or corporate doubt, for anyone who's ever felt invisible in their own story. Building Vectora wasn't just about technology or contracts. It was about claiming my space in a world that tried to deny me one. It was about proving that integrity and ambition aren't opposites, but allies. That respect isn't granted by birthright. It's earned by standing firm in your truth. And while the path wasn't perfect, there were fractures in my family that may never fully heal. What mattered most was the space I'd carved for myself. A space defined not by others' limitations, but by my own unyielding belief in my value. I looked across my desk at the framed photo of Eleanor and me, two women who had broken cycles, rewritten legacies, and dared to hope for better. This journey taught me that true strength isn't in hiding your wounds, but in embracing them. That setting boundaries isn't an act of selfishness, but one of self-love. That sometimes walking away is the bravest step toward standing taller. And to anyone listening, walking their own difficult road, know this: you deserve your seat at the table. You deserve respect, recognition, and the freedom to define your worth on your own terms. Don't let anyone, family, friends, or circumstance tell you otherwise. You are visible, you are powerful, and your story matters. If my journey has resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more stories about reclaiming power and finding your voice. Like this video if you believe in standing tall despite the odds. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own worth, and comment below. What's your story? How have you found the courage to claim your place? Remember, the hardest boundaries to set are often with those closest to us, but they are also the most transformative. Thank you for listening. Keep standing, keep shining.